Hey everyone, buckle up because today we're diving headfirst into the world of self-driving cars, but with a twist.
A twist.
Exactly. We're ditching the usual Silicon Valley chatter and taking a deep dive into a Korean industry analysis report on autonomous vehicles.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating. I'm really curious to hear what insights a Korean perspective brings to this global conversation.
Me too. And one of the first things that jumped out at me was how this report separates automated and autonomous vehicles.
Ah, yes, a subtle but crucial difference, right?
Totally. It seems like sometimes those terms get used interchangeably, but this report makes a clear distinction.
It's all about the level of decision-making. Automation is basically pre-programmed responses to specific situations.
Like staying in your lane or keeping a safe distance from the car in front of you.
Right, exactly. But autonomy goes way beyond that.
So a truly autonomous vehicle could, make complex decisions in real time, adapting to unexpected situations.
Precisely. It could reroute itself to a hospital if it senses a medical emergency with a passenger, or navigate a detour if there's an accident up ahead.
That's incredible. So it's not just about replacing a human driver. It's about creating a vehicle that can actually think for itself, in a way.
That's the ultimate goal, and this report really digs into how South Korea is approaching that challenge.
And what I found really surprising was how far back the history of autonomous vehicles goes.
Oh yeah, it's way longer than most people realize.
I had no idea.
This report takes us all the way back to the 1920s, to a car called the American Wonder.
The American Wonder. What was so wonderful about it?
Well, get this, it could be controlled remotely via wireless signals.
Whoa, seriously. Back in the 1920s, that's before computers even existed.
It's mind-blowing, right? People must have thought it was magic.
Talk about ahead of its time. So that was the very first seed of the self-driving car idea.
In a way, yes, and it just kept evolving from there. In 1977, Japan developed a vehicle that could follow white lane markings autonomously.
So the building blocks were starting to fall into place.
And then in 1986, there was a real breakthrough. A guy named Ernst Dickmann equipped a Mercedes-Benz van with cameras and sensors.
I've heard that name before. He's considered a pioneer in the field, right?
Exactly. His life paved the way for those early semi-autonomous vehicles.
So it wasn't just one aha moment. It was a gradual evolution of ideas and technologies all building on each other.
Precisely. And this report highlights how South Korea was right there in the mix, pushing the boundaries of autonomous vehicle research.
Really? I didn't know they were involved that early on.
Oh, yeah. By the late 1990s, they were already deeply involved, and they even held successful demonstrations of self-driving tech on a highway connecting Goyang and Paju back in the early 2000s.
Wow, so they were right alongside those global pioneers.
Absolutely. They weren't just playing catch-up. They had a unique focus on evolving the technology from basic lane keeping to those more complex tasks like obstacle detection and avoidance.
Makes sense. As computing power increased, those more sophisticated systems became possible.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that by the mid-2010s, South Korea was already ahead of the curve in terms of establishing laws and regulations for autonomous vehicle commercialization.
So they were laying the groundwork for the future, even before self-driving cars were really on most people's radar.
It's a testament to their forward-thinking approach.
Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty, the tech that makes all of this possible.
The magic under the hood.
This report gives a great breakdown of the key components that go into making a self-driving car, and I'm particularly fascinated by the sensor technology.
Oh, the sensors are like the car's eyes and ears, right?
Exactly. They provide all that crucial information about the environment.
We're talking LiDAR, radar, and cameras, each with their own strengths and weaknesses.
For those of us who aren't, engineers, could you give us a quick rundown of how they work?
Of course. So LiDAR uses lasers to create a really detailed 3D map of the surroundings.
Oh, so it's like a super precise way of seeing the world.
Exactly. But it could be affected by things like rain or fog.
Ah, I see. So it's not perfect.
Then you have radar, which uses radio waves and is much better in bad weather, but it doesn't provide as much detail as LiDAR.
That's a trade-off, I guess.
And there are cameras, just like our own eyes, capturing visual information.
Cameras are great for recognizing things like traffic signs, right?
Exactly. But they could be fooled by shadows or poor lighting.
So each sensor has its limitations.
Right, and that's why this report stresses the importance of sensor fusion, combining data from all these different sensors to get a complete and reliable picture.
Ah, so it's like having multiple witnesses to an event. Each one sees things a bit differently, but by combining their accounts, you get a more accurate understanding.
That's a great analogy. It's about creating a robust system that's not reliant on any single sensor.
Now, once the car sees its surroundings, it needs a brain to process all that information and make decisions.
And that's where artificial intelligence, or AI, comes in.
AI, it seems like it's everywhere these days.
It really is. And in the world of autonomous vehicles, AI is essential for analyzing the sensor data, and making those split-second driving decisions.
So it's not just about following a set of pre-programmed rules, it's about learning from experience, just like a human driver.
Exactly. These AI systems are trained on massive amounts of data to recognize patterns, predict what other vehicles and pedestrians will do, and make the safest and most efficient choices in real time.
It's incredible how AI can enhance safety in that way, like having a co-pilot who's always alert and never gets distracted.
And the report talks about how AI is already being used in features like automatic emergency braking, which can react much faster than a human to prevent accidents.
Wow, that's really impressive. Now, beyond sensors and AI, this report also dives into another crucial component, V2X communication.
V2X, now that sounds futuristic. What is that exactly?
Yeah, break that down for us.
It stands for vehicle to everything, and it's all about allowing cars to talk to each other.
Talking cars just like in the movies. But seriously, how does that actually work?
It's wireless communication, basically. Cars can share information about their speed, location, and intentions with each other, as well as with infrastructure like traffic lights and road signs.
So it's like giving cars an extra sense, allowing them to see beyond their immediate surroundings.
Exactly. For example, a car could receive a signal from a traffic light that's about to turn red even before the driver sees it.
That's incredible, and I can imagine how helpful that would be in like a busy intersection or in bad weather.
Absolutely. And the report highlights how V2X can improve safety, efficiency, and even traffic flow. It's about connecting vehicles to the entire transportation ecosystem, not just treating them as isolated entities.
Now, beyond the usual tech suspects like sensors, AI, and V2X, this report goes a step further and talks about other systems that are crucial for safe and effective autonomous driving.
It's like peeling back the layers of the onion, right? There's so much more to it than meets the eye.
Totally. What are some of the highlights?
Well, for one, it talks about these things called automated vehicle guidance systems, which rely on infrastructure-based sensors.
So instead of the sensors being on the car itself, they're embedded in the environment.
Exactly. And these are particularly useful in controlled environments, such as university campuses or areas with a high accident rate.
It makes sense to start in those types of settings where you have more control over the variables.
Right. And then there are these things called co-pilot systems, which act as a bridge between level 2 and level 3 autonomy.
Co-pilot systems, so like having a highly skilled co-driver who can step in if needed.
Exactly. They use a combination of sensors and V2X communication to monitor the driver's state and potentially take control if the driver becomes unresponsive or drowsy.
It's like having a safety net in case the human driver needs to hand over the wheel.
And speaking of levels of autonomy, I think it's time we unpack those a bit further.
Yes, please. I always get a bit confused by all those level 3, level 4 terms.
It could be a bit of a jargon jungle, but this report breaks down the SAE's 6 levels of automation in a clear and concise way. From level 0, which is basically your standard car with no automation, all the way up to level 5, which is full-on driverless autonomy.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's a spectrum of automation, with each level representing a different degree of self-driving capability.
Exactly. And most of the systems we see on the road today are at level 2, offering features like adaptive cruise control and lane keeping assist, but still requiring the driver to be fully engaged.
So even those systems that are marketed as self-driving aren't truly autonomous yet.
Right. They're more like advanced driver assistance systems, helping with specific tasks, but not yet capable of handling all aspects of driving.
And level 3 is where things start to get really interesting, right?
That's where the system can handle most driving tasks under certain conditions, but might still need the driver to intervene in unexpected situations.
So like the car could be driving itself on the highway, but if the weather suddenly changes or there's a construction zone, the human might need to take over.
Exactly. It's a tricky transition point because there's potential for driver confusion. You're not fully in control, but you're not completely hands-free either.
And then levels 4 and 5 are the true holy grail of autonomy, where the car can essentially drive itself in most, if not all, situations.
Exactly. Level 4 can operate with minimal human intervention, maybe only needing input in extreme cases like really bad weather or on unmapped roads, while level 5 is the ultimate goal, complete driverlessness anywhere, anytime.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture now. It's a journey with lots of steps along the way, and we're still in the early stages, but the progress is happening fast.
It really is. And this Korean report paints a fascinating picture of how one of the world's leading tech nations is approaching this complex and exciting challenge.
Well, let's shift gears a bit and dive into what this report has to say about the global autonomous vehicle market, the players, the trends, the challenges.
Sounds good. Let's see what insights we can glean from this Korean perspective. Now, before we get into those challenges, I'm kind of curious about the market itself. How does it all break down?
Yeah, the report mentioned different vehicle types and levels of automation, right?
Exactly. So right now, it's mostly about partial automation. You see those features. everywhere.
Like adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assist, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But get this, the report says there's going to be huge growth in the autonomous trucking market.
Trucking, huh? That makes sense, actually.
Right. Think about it. Highways are perfect for this kind of tech, plus the safety benefits. Huge. Imagine no more driver fatigue on those long hauls.
Yeah, that alone would be a game changer for sure. Now, what about geographically? I mean, is this just like a North America, Europe kind of thing?
Not at all. It's truly global, but each region's got its own flavor. You know what I mean? The report breaks it down.
Oh, cool. What does it say?
Asia-Pacific, including South Korea, of course, has the biggest chunk right now.
I guess that's not surprising given the source of this report, right?
Yeah, and then it's Europe and then North America. But the reasons behind that drift, they're different for each place.
Oh, really? Fill us in.
In Asia-Pacific, it's all about road safety and traffic, making things flow better. Europe, early regulations and government support, they're really pushing for this tech. North America, it's more about government funding for like development programs and pilot projects.
So different strokes for different folks.
Pretty much. Now, of course, you can't talk about a market without talking about like who's actually playing in it, right? Who are the big names?
Yeah, let's talk about those key players. What does the report highlight?
Well, it goes deeper than just like listing names. It actually analyzes their strategies, which I found super interesting.
Oh, cool. Give us the lowdown.
Well, you've got the usual suspects like Tesla, obviously. They're all about those camera-based systems, autopilot, full self-driving.
Yeah, I feel like they're kind of notorious for that, right? Like going all in on cameras while everyone else is using LiDAR and radar and everything else.
Right, and they're all about in-house development, too, constantly improving things through those over-the-air updates.
Classic Silicon Valley, move fast, iterate, break things.
Then you've got Google's Waymo. They're all about commercializing robotaxis, their Waymo One service.
Right, they're out there on the streets actually picking up passengers.
Exactly. They use a whole mix of sensors, LiDAR, radar, cameras, plus HD maps, the whole shebang.
Wow, so they're not messing around.
And they're big on partnerships, too, creating a whole ecosystem, not just going it alone.
So different approaches, but both aiming for the same goal, a driverless future.
Exactly. Now, what about those Korean companies, given that this is a Korea report and all?
Yeah, I'm curious about that, too.
Well, Hyundai's a big player, of course. They've got their own Level 3 system called HDP, and they're heavily investing in those autonomous driving platforms.
I can see why they're already a leader in electric vehicles. It makes sense to combine those two.
Right, like become the one-stop shop for the future of mobility.
Exactly. So they're not just building cars, they're building a whole ecosystem around them.
The report also talks about other big names, General Motors, Ford, BMW, Volvo. They've all got their own angle. But what it really emphasizes is that it's not just about competition. There's a lot of collaboration happening, too.
Oh, that's interesting. Like, they realize they can't do it alone.
Exactly. They're all working on different pieces of this giant puzzle, Automakers, tech companies, sensor manufacturers. Everyone needs each other to make this thing work.
Makes sense. It's a pretty complex challenge.
Now, of course, it's not all sunshine and roses. This report doesn't shy away from the challenges either.
Yeah, let's talk about those bumps in the road.
Well, one of the biggest ones, of course, is safety, right? We need these systems to be even safer than human drivers.
I mean, no pressure, right?
Haha, right. But it's a high bar to clear, We're talking about machines making life or death decisions.
So how do we even begin to address that?
Well, the report really stresses the importance of testing. And I'm not just talking about your everyday driving situations. We need to be testing for those, like, weird, unpredictable situations.
Oh, like those edge cases you always hear about?
Exactly. Those sudden swerves, unexpected obstacles, things that can even trip up experienced human drivers.
So it's not just about teaching the car to follow the rules. It's about teaching it to, like, think on its feet?
Precisely. And that requires a ton of data. Real-world driving data from all kinds of different environments.
It's like giving the AI a crash course in defensive driving, but on a scale that's, like, impossible for humans.
Exactly. The report also emphasizes the need for constant improvement. Those over-the-air updates are going to be crucial for refining those algorithms, fixing bugs, adapting to new challenges.
So the learning never really stops, even after the car is out on the road.
Exactly. It's a constantly evolving thing. Now, of course, beyond the technical stuff, there's the human factor too, right? People need to trust these cars before they're going to let them drive.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a big leap of faith to hand over control to a machine.
Absolutely. The report talks about the need for transparency, being open about how these systems work, and of course, demonstrating safety, doing those public demonstrations.
It's about showing people that this isn't just some cool tech demo, but a viable and safe alternative to human drivers.
Right. Building that trust is going to be key. Now, another big concern, of course, is jobs, right? What happens to all those drivers?
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, trucking alone employs millions of people.
Exactly. And this report acknowledges that. It suggests things like retraining programs for workers in those affected industries.
So, like, helping people transition to new roles within the autonomous vehicle sector or even in other fields.
Exactly. It's about making sure that, progress, doesn't leave people behind.
Now, what about those ethical questions? I feel like those are like a whole other can of worms, right?
Oh, absolutely. Things like liability in accidents, Who's responsible when something goes wrong? And how do these cars make decisions in those unavoidable crash scenarios?
Yeah, that's heavy stuff. Like, who does the car choose to save in a situation where someone's going to get hurt?
Exactly. Plus, there's data privacy, algorithmic bias, a whole bunch of ethical considerations that need to be addressed.
It's clear that we need some, like, serious guidelines and regulations to navigate this new landscape.
Right, and this report actually calls for a global framework, which I think is crucial. We can't have each country doing its own thing if we want these cars to be able to operate across borders.
Makes sense. It needs to be a coordinated effort.
This framework needs to cover everything: safety, technical standards, those ethical considerations, data privacy, cybersecurity, the whole shebang.
It's a tall order, but I guess that's the price of progress.
You got it. Now, despite all these challenges, the report remains, optimistic about the future of autonomous vehicles. It paints this picture of a world with fewer accidents, less traffic, greater mobility for everyone.
It's a future worth striving for, even if it's not going to be easy getting there.
Exactly. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, dreaming about the future, I think it's worth taking a step back and looking at where things were when this report was actually published.
Oh, yeah, good point. Like a little time travel back to the recent past of autonomous vehicles.
Exactly. So as we discussed earlier, level 2 systems were kind of the norm back then.
Like Tesla was making a lot of noise with autopilot, but it was still very much a driver assist system.
Right. Level 3 was just starting to emerge, but with those challenges we talked about, driver confusion, limited capabilities.
And levels 4 and 5, those were still mostly in the realm of research labs and pilot programs.
Yeah, it was a time of rapid development, but also a lot of uncertainty. Like, which direction is this all going to go? A lot has changed in just a few short years.
So the landscape was kind of different back then, huh?
Oh, for sure. And speaking of landscape, I'm curious about the competitive landscape. Was it as diverse as it is today?
Yeah, fill us in on that.
Well, the report definitely talks about this rise of a multipolar world. It wasn't just the established automakers anymore. Tech companies were jumping into the game.
And that trend has only accelerated since then, right? It's clear that Silicon Valley doesn't have a monopoly on the future of this technology.
Right. And what's interesting is how the report highlights the growing influence of Asian companies, particularly from China and South Korea.
Yeah, we're seeing that play out right now.
Another thing it emphasized was the importance of those strategic partnerships. Automakers cleaning up with tech companies, sensor manufacturers, everyone realizing that this is a team effort.
So like a giant brain trust, everyone bringing their unique expertise to the table.
Exactly. It's too big of a challenge to tackle alone. Now, let's dive into some of those specific companies mentioned in the report. I'm kind of curious about their backstories.
Yeah, give us the inside scoop. What were some of the standout moments?
Well, Tesla's approach, even back then, it was pretty unconventional. They were all in on those cameras, while most others were using that fusion approach cameras, LiDAR, radar.
Yeah, that sparked a lot of debate in the industry. Some people thought they were crazy.
Right. But it's interesting to see how that's played out. While LiDAR is still important for many, Tesla has made some impressive progress with their camera-based system, especially with all that real-world driving data they've collected.
So they might be proving the doubters wrong, at least to some extent.
What about Google's Waymo? What was the buzz around them back then?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too.
Well, they were definitely seen as the front runner when it came to fully autonomous vehicles, especially with that focus on robotaxi services.
Right, they were all about actually getting those cars out on the streets.
Exactly. Their approach was more cautious, though, very deliberate, prioritizing safety and reliability over rushing to market, lots of testing in those controlled environments before they expanded their operations.
So slow and steady wins the race.
Pretty much. Now, what about those Korean companies? I'm always fascinated by their perspective.
Yeah, me too. What did the report say about them?
Well, Hyundai was a major player, of course, and the report highlighted their commitment to integrating autonomous tech with their electric vehicles, which seems like a really smart move.
Right, like two birds with one stone. They were already a leader in EVs, so why not combine those forces?
Exactly. They were positioning themselves at the forefront of that whole future of mobility thing, recognizing that EVs and autonomous vehicles would inevitably converge.
And they weren't just focused on building the cars themselves, right? They were also investing in developing those autonomous driving platforms that other companies could use. It's clear they had bigger ambitions, like becoming a key player in the whole ecosystem, not just a car manufacturer.
It's fascinating to see how those seeds that were planted back then have blossomed into the vibrant ecosystem we have today. But let's not get too caught up in the past. What about those cutting-edge technologies that were just on the horizon back then?
Yeah, hit me with some future tech. What were the big breakthroughs that were shaping the future of autonomous driving, according to this report?
Well, sensor technology was a huge focus. There were Big advances in LiDAR, radar, camera systems, even some new types of sensors emerging like thermal imaging and ultrasonic sensors. It was all about enhancing the car's perception, giving it a richer and more detailed understanding of the world around it.
So, like, instead of just relying on sight, these cars were developing like a whole new set of senses.
Exactly. The report even mentions the development of solid-state LiDAR, which promised to be smaller, cheaper, and more durable than those bulky spinning LiDAR units that were common back then.
Solid-state LiDAR, that sounds like a game changer.
It was a big deal. Making LiDAR more accessible for mass-market vehicles was a huge step forward. Now, alongside those sensor advancements, you had the ever-evolving world of artificial intelligence, those deep learning algorithms constantly getting smarter.
Deep learning, that's the brain of the autonomous vehicle, right?
Exactly. The report emphasizes the importance of training these algorithms on those massive data sets of real-world driving data, pushing the boundaries of what AI could do.
It's kind of crazy to think about how much data these systems need to, learn how to drive.
Right, and fueling all of this was the constant improvement in computing power, allowing those ever more complex AI models to be deployed in vehicles. It's like a classic example of how progress in one area of technology can have this ripple effect throughout other fields.
It's like a positive feedback loop. Better hardware leads to better software, which then demands even better hardware, and on it goes.
Exactly. Now, one trend that I found really interesting was the development of open-source platforms for autonomous driving.
Open source. So, sharing the code for self-driving cars with everyone.
Pretty much. The idea was to foster collaboration and speed up innovation, allowing developers from all over the world to contribute to this shared code base.
It's like a global brain trust, all working together to solve this challenge.
Exactly. Now, what were some other trends the report highlighted? Well, the integration of V2X communication was a big one.
V2X, we talked about that earlier, right? Those talking cars.
Right. And this report envisions a future where V2X is essential, allowing vehicles to talk to each other, to infrastructure, to pedestrians, everyone and everything.
It's like creating this connected ecosystem where information is flowing freely, making everything smoother and safer.
Exactly. Now, speaking of information, the report also talks about these things called HD maps.
HD maps, like high definition.
Exactly. These are highly detailed 3D representations of the driving environment with all kinds of information like lane markings, road signs, traffic lights, even the location of curbs and other stationary objects.
So it's like giving the car a super detailed map of the world so it knows exactly what to expect.
Precisely. These HD maps could significantly improve the accuracy and reliability of those autonomous driving systems, especially in tricky conditions like bad weather or low visibility.
It's a reminder that autonomous driving isn't just about the car itself, but also about the infrastructure that supports it.
Exactly. Now, of course, we can't forget about the human side of things, right? This report talks about the importance of designing those user interfaces for passengers, making it easy for people to interact with these vehicles.
Yeah, it needs to be a good experience, not just a technological marvel.
Right. At the end of the day, it's about creating a transportation system that's not just technologically advanced, but also enjoyable and comfortable for the people who use it.
So let's zoom out for a second and talk about the bigger picture, What kind of impact could autonomous vehicles have on society as a whole?
Well, beyond the obvious stuff like safety and reduced congestion, these vehicles could really reshape our cities, our economies, even our daily lives.
It's like those sci-fi movies where flying cars transform the urban landscape, but in this case, it's self-driving cars. And the changes might be more subtle, but still pretty profound.
I like that analogy. Imagine cities with fewer parking lots because cars can just drop people off and park themselves somewhere else. Imagine the impact on retail with those autonomous delivery vehicles making same-day delivery the norm.
Yeah, and what about the changes to our work lives? Imagine if your commute became productive time or even just time to relax.
Right, it could really change the way we think about transportation. But of course, we have to acknowledge the potential downsides too, right?
Yeah, the report didn't shy away from those.
Job displacement, cybersecurity risks, those ethical dilemmas, these are all challenges that we need to be thinking about and addressing proactively.
It's a balancing act, right? Embracing the potential while mitigating the risks.
Exactly. This report really highlights the complexity of this whole issue, reminding us that it's a global phenomenon that needs, global solutions.
It's not something any one country can solve on its own.
Exactly. And that brings us to, a really important question for our listeners to ponder. Given all these potential impacts, both good and bad, how do WE as a society prepare for this future where autonomous vehicles are just a normal part of life?
It's a question with no easy answers, but it's one that we all need to be thinking about.
Right, because the decisions we make today are going to shape the world of tomorrow. But before we get too lost in the future, let's take a look at what's happening right now in the world of autonomous vehicles. Stay tuned for part 3 of our deep dive.
Welcome back, everyone. We've been on quite a journey exploring the world of autonomous vehicles through this Korean report. And as we've seen, the potential impact on society, well, it's pretty mind-blowing.
It really is. It's like we're on the verge of this massive shift, not just in how we get around, but in how we live and work.
Exactly. And before the break, we were talking about those potential impacts, both positive and negative. And I think the question you left us with was, like, how do we actually prepare for this future where self-driving cars are just, everywhere?
It's the million-dollar question, right? And the answer, well, it's not simple. There's no, like, one-size-fits-all solution. But I think this Korean report offers some good starting points.
Okay, so what can we actually do to, navigate this transition smoothly? Give us some actionable advice.
Well, first and foremost, I think we need to foster an open and honest conversation about all of this. Move beyond the hype and the fear-mongering and really engage in a nuanced discussion about the benefits and the risks of this technology.
So, like, actually addressing those tough questions, like what happens to all the truck drivers? What about safety? What about data privacy? All those things that people are worried about, and rightfully so.
Exactly. And this conversation, it can't just be happening among, like, experts and policymakers. We need to involve the general public because ultimately they're the ones who are going to be using and interacting with these vehicles.
That makes sense. People are more likely to accept something if they understand it and feel like they have a voice in shaping it, right?
Absolutely. And that brings us to another key point, education. We need to make sure people understand how this technology works. What are the limitations? How do you interact with the self-driving car safely?
It's like demystifying the whole thing.
Exactly. Demystifying it. Now, alongside public education, we also got to make sure our laws and regulations are keeping up with all this rapid change.
Yeah, the legal side of things is a big one. What kind of regulations are we talking about specifically?
Well, we need clear guidelines on things like liability and accidents. Who's responsible when something goes wrong?
Right. That's a tricky one.
And what about data privacy? How is all that data being collected and used? Cybersecurity, ethical considerations, all of these need to be addressed. And these regulations, they have to strike a balance, right? You want to encourage innovation, but you also have to protect the public interest.
It's a tough balancing act for sure.
And it's not just a national thing either. This report really emphasizes the need for international cooperation, Like, we need global standards and protocols if we want these vehicles to operate safely and smoothly across borders.
Yeah, it's a global issue, so it needs a global solution.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the physical environment, Our cities, our infrastructure, it was all designed for human drivers.
Right, so we're going to need to make some changes to accommodate these self-driving cars.
Exactly. We might need to rethink traffic lights, road signs, even the layout of our streets. And we'll definitely need to invest in those communication networks, those high-definition maps that provide the detailed information these vehicles need to navigate safely and efficiently.
It's a reminder that autonomous vehicles don't exist in a vacuum, right? They're part of a larger system, this complex ecosystem that includes infrastructure, data networks, and of course, us, the humans.
Precisely. Now, I know we've focused a lot on the challenges, but I think it's important to end on a positive note.
Yeah, let's not forget why this technology is so exciting in the first place.
Right. Imagine a world with way fewer accidents, where people with disabilities have more freedom and independence, where commutes become productive time, or just time to relax. And our cities, they could be quieter, cleaner, more biffable.
It's a pretty compelling vision, and it's not just a fantasy, right? This technology is advancing so rapidly, and we're already seeing glimpses of this future starting to take shape.
It's an incredible time to be witnessing this transformation, and this Korean report, it really gives us a valuable roadmap. It highlights not just the technical stuff, but also those broader societal implications and the need for thoughtful planning and collaboration.
It reminds us that we have a choice in how we shape this future. We can either let technology dictate the terms, or we can proactively design a future where autonomous vehicles make our lives better in a way that aligns with our values.
I couldn't have said it better myself, and I think that's a great message to leave our listeners with.
I agree. This deep dive has been really eye-opening, and I hope everyone listening will keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and engage in those thoughtful discussions about the future of transportation.
Because the possibilities are endless, and the choices we make today, they're going to shape the world we live in tomorrow.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive, and until next time, keep seeking knowledge and challenging assumptions.